friends, welcome to your fourth C++ tutorial. In this tutorial friends, we are finally going to make your first C++ program. In all my tutorials friends, I am going to use code blocks. I know in schools we are made to use Turbo C++, but in reality code blocks is much better than that. It makes your work much easier. But in case if you have to use Turbo C++, then I will keep on telling you the slight changes you need to make to use that. Okay, so don't worry. Now you will go to create a new project, console application, C++. Next, now you can choose any project title. For this I am choosing project 1. Next, then I will go to sources and main.cpp. Now friends, I want you to first load the extension. It is .cpp. Each C++ file has the extension .cpp. And see these lines. This is the basic format of all the C++ programs. Means every C++ program needs to have these essential statements. So this is the advantage of code blocks. It reduces your work. How many times are you going to write all this? Each time you will open a project, you need to write all these essential statements. So code blocks thought that it should do that work. But in Turbo, whenever you will open a new project, you will have to write these statements again and again. And you notice friends, this is the most basic program and the most simplest program that you are ever going to make. It will just print hello world in the output screen. But for that also you have to write these 7 statements. So it means these lines are very important. And we are going to understand them all right now, okay? As these are all very important for your Viva. Okay friends, now let us understand these very important terminologies. First is the source code. Friends, whatever I am writing here, whatever code, hash include, iostream, hello world, whatever is this is the source code. But this source code is written in human understandable language. Because I am writing this code, so I need to understand whatever I am writing. I am able to understand this. And this is the high level language because it's much easier to code in such languages. But computer does not understand any language other than its own machine language. So we need a language processor to process the high level language so as to make it understandable to the computer. Now you may also know that we have 3 types of language processors: assembler, interpreter and compiler. But here we use a compiler. You may have noticed while I was opening this code blocks, there it was written GNU GCC compiler. So here I am using this GNU GCC compiler. But what's the role of a compiler? It converts the entire HLL program in one go into this computer understandable form, and then it reports the error, and in order to run them you have to rectify those errors. After you remove all the errors, it finally executes your program, and that process of execution of the program is known as compilation. Here the compiler is GNU GCC. Now friends, you know what compilation is. So now I can easily tell you about what is a preprocessor directive. This first statement only is actually an example of a preprocessor directive. Do you remember friends, when I was explaining you about punctuators in the second tutorial, then I told you that we will be using 3 of all the punctuators in your first C++ program only. They were this hash, pound sign, semicolon and these braces. Right? Now I am going to tell you about this hash, pound sign, as all the preprocessor directives begin with this hash, that is pound sign. Right? For example, this statement is also a preprocessor directive and this is beginning with hash. So you can easily distinguish them between all the other statements in the program. So let us look at the definition. It is quite tough. Preprocessor directives are some special lines that begin with the character hash. Yes, we can see that. And these are invoked by the compiler to process some programs before compilation. and these lines are not program statements, but these are directives for the preprocessor. Okay, so from these statements we actually understood that these preprocessor directives, these are meant for the preprocessor. Okay, means preprocessor has to deal with them. So this was actually the bookish language. Let me explain it to you in simple language. First of all, what is a preprocessor? In C++ or C, a preprocessor is a part of the compiler, and it provides the ability for inclusion of some files to your program. Means there are some files and you need to include them in your program to perform various operations. Without them your program is incomplete. So to include them, a preprocessor is required. You know friends, before compilation there is something else also. There is a pre-processing phase. First is the pre-processing phase and then is the compilation. So what happens during that? In pre-processing phase, the preprocessor processes some programs to include some files in that program, and these are very important files. So what actually happens when you run your program? Before the actual compilation of every C program, it is passed through a preprocessor. The preprocessor looks through the program and finds specific instruction called preprocessor directives that are beginning with this hash sign and that it can understand easily. And then finally, after that pre-processing phase, the compiler converts your program to machine understandable form. Okay, so first comes the role of the preprocessor and then the compiler comes. So if this is your program, you will always find some lines that are beginning with hash, and these are none other than the preprocessor directives. Okay, so before compilation, the preprocessor has to do the required preprocessing in according to these preprocessor directives. There are many types of preprocessor directives, but the most common among them are two, that are hash include and hash define. We will first focus on hash include because it is used here. This hash include directive allows the preprocessor to include those files in your program. Now what is the necessity to include those files? Those files are actually header files. You may have heard about them. Now let us see what is a header file. See friends, I actually want you all to focus now. These are very important. See friends, the C++ language contains some statements only, but there are a lot of functions that are very important. They are actually known as built-in functions, and those functions are not included within the C++ language. So these all together are stored in a separate library, and that is known as the standard library. Very important. Now if we need these stored functions, then we have to include that library file from the standard library, and that library file is basically known as a header file, which actually has all the necessary functions. So if you need a function, you have to include that file. But how you will include that file? You need something. So this hash include comes to role at that time when you need to include a file. So this IO stream also is actually a header file. You need to include this for some reason, I'm going to tell you, and that's why you use this hash include directive. Okay, so now you understand the use of this hash include directive, and side by side I also told you the concept of a header file. See, all the built-in functions that are necessary to carry out various operations are stored in the standard library, and if you need a function, then we have to include the desired header file. For example friends, if you are making a program to calculate the square root of a number, and you don't want to create a program, you just need to use a function, an inbuilt function, or that can perform your square root. And a function is also there to perform square root. It is denoted by sqrt. But that square root function, if you need to include that, you have to include a header file for that, and that is math.h, because that square root function along with all the mathematical functions are packed inside that math.h header file. So by this hash include directive, you can include that header file in order to use that square root function. Okay, so you have to include the header file math.h. Header files end with an extension .h, but now with modern compilers, .h is not used, it's not necessary. So you can even write in code blocks math, simply math, not .h, as here also we have written iostream, not iostream.h. Okay, but in Turbo C++ you have to write iostream.h. So we know what a header file is now. Let's come to iostream. iostream is also a header file. Its full form is actually I for input, O for output, and then stream. Input, output, stream. It is required to implement input and output facilities. For example, if there is a program to obtain the sum of two numbers, then you have to input two numbers and then you will get the output as their sum. So these input and output operations can be carried out only through this iostream.